Hi, I'm John from OurHomeFromScratch.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how to frame a basement wall in front of a pipe. Well, it's been a few weeks since we've been back in the basement working on our project, finishing the basement, and in our last video I was framing a perimeter wall, doing the insulation and showing you the framing process there. And I'm down to pretty much my last perimeter wall here. Now this wall is the front of our house and it's got my main sewage pipe on it. And so I have to frame out in front of it. And so I had gotten a few questions on how am I approaching this, what's the process for how to do this portion. So I have two walls. I have this long wall here and a short, maybe 8-foot section of also pipe on another wall. So once I get these done, I can start doing my interior wall framing. And so this is how I'm going to approach this. This wall is an exterior wall and it needs insulation, and I'm going to glue on my XPS installation. And in other walls, I had used my 2x4s right in front of that XPS to keep it in place. So I won't be able to do that here because I have this pipe. So the wall needs to be, the framing needs to be out in front of the pipe. And so I'll show you what I'm going to do. But to get started, I want to go over this little gauge I made really quick, and I think I showed this in a previous video, but I have 2 inches marked off for my XPS insulation, and then I have the distance from the end for where the pipe will end. So if I hold this to the wall, I have a line there that shows me where the pipe will end approximately, and then in front of that I have a 3.5-inch space for my framing lumber. All right, so when I put this against the wall, I can use this measurement here to mark the ceiling for my fire stop, which I've already done. So that's how I got my measurement for the fire stop, so that plywood's in place. And I can also use this on the floor. So I can put this mark on the floor against the wall, like I can butt it against the wall, draw this line in a few places, and use that as my mark for my pressure-treated 2x4, which goes on the floor, and that gets ram set in, just like in the last video. So we'll get started. I'm going to install my top, my sill or my header board along my fire stop, and then I'll ram set in my pressure-treated board, and then we can frame it out as we go. Okay, so I'm starting with framing out the top plate here, and since I'm doing this by myself, what I find helpful is to rest one end on a tall ladder. And then what I can do is just walk down to another small ladder and lift it up. So now I'm going to flush the end of this 2x4 up with the edge of my fire stop. And so making the fire stop the perfect size for this is convenient here. So I can just flush it up. So I'm flushing it up to the previous board I just installed on the end, and then the edge of this 2x4 I'm flushing up to the end of that fire stop. And then I can tack it in with my framing nailer. And again, I can just go down the other side of the basement and repeat that. So now for the floorboard, I'm using pressure-treated 2x4 with a ram set. And this shoots a charge into the floor to get that to stay fastened. As I did before, I'm going to be insulating the walls with a 2-inch thick XPS. This is an R10. And so I'm putting some foam board glue in the back to keep it there long term. Also going to cut a piece for above the pipe, so I just divided this to an above and below pipe portion. For my studs, I'm going to cut them to length after I measure the distance between the top and the bottom, and tack them in at the top and the bottom with my framing nailer. Now to compress the XPS against the wall until the glue dries, I'm just going to use a piece of scrap wood and a construction screw just to hold that in. So once the glue dries, I can pull that off. All my joints between my XPS are going to be used with some tape to keep it a vapor barrier. Next, I'm taking my horizontal fire block, which is a 1/2-inch thick CDX plywood, and it's been cut and notched to fit around my pipe. And so I'm going to use, again, some construction screws up and down it to keep it in place. And then once it's installed, I can go back and fill in the gaps all the way top to bottom against the wall and then around the pipe with my fire block expanding foam. So that's it. Same process as before, just a little different, bigger fire stops and stuff. Okay, so that was the process on how to frame out a wall in front of a pipe. Really the only big difference here is you can't use your 2x4s to compress any XPS insulation. If you're not using XPS insulation, this is really easy. You just use your fire stop and frame out in front of it and you're good. But since I'm using XPS, I needed some scrap wood to compress the XPS against the wall until the glue sets. And so what I can do now is tomorrow or the next day, I can go back, I can take out my scrap boards that are compressing the insulation, and I can go back and do every other stud and then continue down the wall. So, you know, a little more complicated, but not too bad. And again, you have to use your fire block around all your pipes. All my gaps above and below my pipe on the wall where the XPS doesn't quite touch it, I'll go back and fill that in with regular expanding foam, not the fire blocking stuff. I don't need to use the fire block. Regular foam will work fine. So if you thought this video was helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. In my next video, I'll be done with the perimeter framing and all the insulation work, and I can get started with interior framing walls. I'm really looking forward to the interior stuff. That way I can start segregating one room from the next and getting doors installed and getting ready to do the wiring and the plumbing and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to being done the framing, but it's going to be a little while longer. So thanks and see you next time.